Hello, students! Have you ever wondered what happens when the monsoon is not good? How a simple lack of rain can cause a huge problem for the whole country? Well, today we are going to explore exactly that. We'll see how a natural disaster can lead to a serious food crisis.
So, here is our plan for today's lesson. We'll start with a story about a small village facing a drought. Then, we will see how this problem creates a ripple effect. We will learn two important terms, food insecurity and famine. We will also look at a real, very serious event from India's history. And finally, we'll see what systems our government has built to prevent such crises, and we'll summarize what we have learned.
All right, let's begin. Our story starts in a simple village where life depends on farming. It's here, in a place like this, that a small problem with the weather can grow into something much bigger.
I want you to just take a moment and imagine this. Think of a village. The land is dry and cracked. The sun is very harsh. And the crops, the plants that everyone was waiting for, have all failed. What do you think would be the immediate result of this? Let's trace the steps. First, because of the drought, the crops fail. This means the farmers harvest very, very little food. So what happens next? There is less food available in the local markets. And you know from basic economics, when the supply of something goes down, the price goes up. Suddenly, basic food like rice and wheat becomes very expensive.
Now, this increase in price is not just a number. It creates a kind of ripple effect that spreads across the whole community. But do you think it affects everyone in the same way? Let's find out who is affected the most. Think about the people in the village. The farmers, who were expecting to sell their crops, have now lost their income for the entire year. The farm laborers, the people who work on these farms for daily wages. Well, if there is no crop, there is no work, so they lose their jobs. And most importantly, the poorest families, who are already finding it difficult to manage, they simply cannot afford to buy the food at these new high prices.
You see, this whole situation that we have just described, it has a specific name. It is called food insecurity. Please remember this term. It doesn't just mean being hungry for a day. It means people do not have reliable access to enough affordable and nutritious food to lead a healthy life.
Now, it's very important to understand that food insecurity can be of two types. It can be temporary, which is caused by a sudden disaster, like the drought in our story, or maybe a flood or an earthquake. But for some people, food insecurity is a constant or persistent problem. This is caused by long-term poverty and not having a regular job. So, we have seen the problem in one village. But what happens if this food insecurity becomes very severe and it spreads over a very large area, affecting millions of people? That is when the situation becomes the ultimate crisis. That is when it can turn into a famine.
So what is a famine? A famine is the most extreme form of food insecurity. It is a situation where there is such an extreme shortage of food that it leads to widespread starvation and, sadly, even deaths on a very large scale.
To really understand how terrible a famine can be, we must learn about a very painful chapter from our own country's past. We are going to talk about the Bengal famine of 1943.
In 1943, a terrible famine occurred in the province of Bengal. The number of people who died is shocking. It is estimated that about 30 lakh people, that is 3 million people, lost their lives. It was one of the most devastating famines in recent history.
Now, when you hear about such a huge famine, you would think that there was no food produced at all, right? But let's look at this table carefully. It shows the total availability of rice in Bengal. Look at the number for 1943, the year of the famine. It was 79 lakh tons. Now, compare it to 1941, when there was no famine. There was actually more rice available in 1943 than in 1941. This is strange, isn't it?
So, this brings us to a very, very important question. If there was food in the market, why did millions of people starve to death? I want you to think about this for a moment. What could be the reason?
And here is the answer. This is the most crucial lesson from this chapter. The problem was not the availability of food, the problem was access to food. What happened was, the price of rice shot up very high. At the same time, the poorest people like the farm laborers, fishermen, and transport workers, they lost their incomes, so the food was there, but they did not have the money to buy it. Their purchasing power was gone.
After learning the hard lesson from the Bengal famine, the government of India realized that we needed a proper system to make sure such a tragedy never happens again. We needed a safety net to protect our people. Let's see what this system is.
Our country's food security system has two main parts. The first is the buffer stock. This means the government, through an organization called the Food Corporation of India, or FCI, buys extra wheat and rice from farmers and stores it safely in big warehouses. The second part is the Public Distribution System, or PDS. You may have seen these ration shops in your localities. Through these shops, the government distributes the food from the buffer stock to poor people at a very low, subsidized price.
Okay, we have covered some very important ideas today. So before we end, let's just quickly summarize the main points from our lesson. So what have we learned? First, food insecurity is when people cannot get enough food. Second, disasters like droughts can cause this problem by reducing food supply and increasing prices. Third, famine is the most severe form of food insecurity. And fourth, and maybe the most important lesson of all, just having food available is not enough. People must also be able to afford it. Access is as important as availability.
So as we end our lesson, I want to leave you with one final thought. The next time you hear about a disaster like a flood somewhere in the country, I want you to observe. See how the government and the community respond. Notice how systems like the PDS work to help people. Because it's important to remember that behind all these policies and systems are real people who need our help. Thank you.